Hello, I am Prabhu Chawla. Welcome to EE Expression, a digital platform from the New Indian Express Group for discussing, debating, and finding solutions to many complex issues faced by the country. Today, we are here to discuss and dissect ninth budget of the Modi government, jointly hosted by the Confederation of Indian Industry and the New Indian Express. The topic for today is budgeting for India's decade. And we have a very special panel of prominent industry giants and thinkers. We have with us here today in the studio Uday Kotak, President CII, Venu Srinivasan, Chairman TVS Motor Company, Sanjeev Bajaj, Vice President CII, Chairman and Managing Director of Bajaj Financial Services Limited, Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General of the CII. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining to discuss the budget today. Welcome, gentlemen, to discuss the third budget of Nirmala Sitharaman and the ninth budget of the NDA government, led by Mr. Narendra Modi. I will ask one by one question. First, I will ask the CII president and the famous banker. Uday, you tell me one thing which you expected has not happened in the budget.
No increase in taxes.
That was a surprise, or you
expected that? There was a concern that there could be a COVID tax or something like that. The finance minister surprised us with no increase in taxes.
There's a cess on agriculture development on the petroleum product. That you are happy anyway. It doesn't affect you.
No, anyway. I'm just saying in general, the budget has ensured continuity and stability on taxation policy, which is extremely important. And there was concern that there could be some increase in taxes. So that is a positive surprise.
So that is one thing you expected has not happened. There's no taxation at all.
Yes.
Venu, is that the surprise for you? You expected this?
Well, I think the big thing that happened in this budget is the focus on capex.
No, Venu, I'm asking you one thing which you did not expect, which you expected and not happened.
Which I expected. I did not have much expectations from the budget. I was just waiting to see, because we are coming off COVID with huge deficits, and they said it was going to be a path-breaking budget. So frankly, I could not say what expectations I had. I was waiting to see what the budget of the century would look like.
And you tell us, you expected something which has not happened.
So Prabhu, from CII, we gave a large set of recommendations, and there was some major set of recommendations. When I take a look at them, the one word which has not happened is nothing. All our significant recommendations have been considered, and that's why we are all very positive on this budget.
No, that is expected. I want a very specific thing from all of you, one by one. From the CII perspective is different, but individually as an entrepreneur on your own right, I expected each one of you will have some kind of a priority which you were expecting from the government has not happened. But I think you're hedging your bets on that, because you have expected a policy continuity, tax stability, which is a new jargon I've heard this time. But all the time you have been asking for some changes in the tax structure. And this time Modi, Mr. Prime Minister, has imputed today also. One good thing about this is that there's no taxation. But that's okay. I can respect you. But another thing which everybody has asked you, but I want to ask you again, I hope you will not repeat it. One thing, Uday, which think is the best in this budget. Don't say tax stability. That you have told me.
I think the best thing about this budget is a very significant disclosure of a mindset which is pro-private sector enterprise and pro-markets. The budget has been very clear about the direction in which this government wants to take the destiny of India in the years to come. And the value of this is more than anything written on a piece of paper. It is changing the perspective that India is open to take calls for reform, even if it means some bets of higher borrowing in the short run, for going out there, respecting markets and respecting private enterprise. That is the biggest message and signal I read from the budget.
Recognizing the wealth creators, which Mr. Modi used to call last year. He said, welcome wealth creators and want to encourage them.
Across the board, small, big business, go out there. We are with you. Take the risks, create enterprise, create jobs as you create enterprise.
What was your good thing in this one thing? You said you're not expecting
One
anything.
thing is investment in capital expenditure and infrastructure. For years, we've been crying hoarse that capital expenditure should be increased. They brought down revenue deficit and increased capital expenditure. This is the best thing for the future because continued investment in infrastructure is necessary to grow our economy and make it more competitive.
Yeah, Sanjeev.
With the big emphasis on the real economy, to me, the one thing is the significant focus on strengthening the financial services sector, which has to support the real economy. So, whether it's the announcement of the development financial institution, whether it is the bad bank, a la the ARC, the AMC, the divestments that they've talked about in the two public sector banks and one general insurance company, and LIC's IPO, all very significant announcements. And as we see their execution, this will play a big role, not only the next year, but in the next many years to support our economic growth.
Chandraji, from the CII perspective, what do you think is the one good thing? You have given so many memorandums, I know hundreds of them must have gone.
So actually, the delight was to see this phenomenal focus on growth. And I think that's something which was extremely important. The government has betted on growth, and which has been across the spectrum of the budget. When we talk about that there was no raise in tax, one did not raise the taxes, etc. So everywhere you see it's betting on growth. And the boldness with which it is done, it is talked for the privatization, say for instance, it has been talked for the first time. We have heard about disinvestment in the past, but going through talking this boldness, both in terms of the reforms and the betting on growth are phenomenal aspects of the budget. And I see that cutting across the entire of the budget speech, it shows government's commitment towards not only, as Uday mentioned, pro-market, but I thought it's also really focused on betting on and very confident that yes, one big thing that needs to now happen is of course implementation, but that we can make these statements and we will keep our target strong. Let's not get worried about fiscal deficit. Let's put in our best to see to it, and money will come in. And I think that's a huge boldness in reforms. And you asked as to what we have not seen in the budget. I would think while many things have been, we had asked, it was a huge list of expected things, and we were tick marking, and we tick marked almost all boxes that we had asked for. But yes, there is, at this point in time, there are certain sectors which has been crying, which is this hospitality and the tourism sector. Probably they expected something in their basket for themselves. The civil aviation sector, they wanted something for their I would have also thought something coming in terms of one big announcement which was pending, which we keep asking, and I think some of these can come outside of the budget. By the way, everything need not be in the budget, but some important thing was there's a huge amount of bill spending and payment pending for the private sector. We have been pushing for those to be sort of paid up. So there are a few things we will keep talking, I guess, about those ones.
You see, as a journalist, I've been covering Parliament and the budget for almost 40 years. It's the first time I'm hearing industry leaders not speaking about deficit. They have always been speaking control deficit budget, control deficit, reduce it to under the 3%, 4%. Suddenly, all of you are saying, no, it is a good thing to have a deficit budget. What changed your mindset? Suddenly in 39 budget, if I read out the statement of all the past CII presidents, I have just read it, some of them. I don't want to quote them because it will be embarrassing. Because all of you have been talking about withdrawal of subsidies and controlled deficit financing. Suddenly, why you find deficit financing now the new panacea for some kind of a growth? Today, because you raised this question.
Yeah, Prabhu, I think we are going to also look at the sign of our times. We are coming out of a pandemic where I think the government of India needed to support lives and livelihood. And the government of India did it. That increased the deficit. We are just coming out of this pandemic. At a time like this, if we suddenly tighten fiscal deficit to the pre-COVID mindset. It would not be appropriate for an event which has happened once in 100 years, which is this pandemic. And therefore, at CII, we had recommended a glide path towards normalization of deficit over 3 years. What the finance minister has come out with is a glide path over a 4-year period, which is between 3 and 4, not a major change, but it is consistent with what we felt was the right way to do. Yes, the deficit for the year ended March 21, based on budget estimates, is higher than what some of us or most economists were saying. They were expecting around 7.5% of GDP for March 21. It has turned out to be 9.5%. But Prabhu, what I would give a lot of credit is for the first time we have got to a very high level of transparency in our financial numbers. And I must say that whether you talk to investors, analysts, economists, they give a huge value to transparency in the functioning of a company or a country. And therefore, coming out and saying, I will not have food subsidy and other things outside the budget, bringing it inside the budget, which is another 1.6% of GDP. Therefore, 9.5% has to be adjusted for it. Similarly, next year, 6.8 also, there is no hidden off balance sheet items. Therefore, you are getting what you're seeing. Therefore, some of the deficit increase has happened because of transparency. That deficit was always there. It was not being shown. We are seeing, we are getting the mirror to see where we are.
I'll come out with this. What are the hidden facts? Where are they in the fine print? I'll just point out one by one after little one. Because what happened, you made a statement in the beginning, the first time there's the private sector encouragement, there's industry encouragement, that I could see that shares, private investor capital growth went up by 5 lakh crore rupees in one day. All of you shareholders who own the company got 5 lakh crore rupees extra by the stock market. Whether the lower middle class did not get a single penny in the budget, that is what was expected, because they are the same. This, as you rightly pointed out, is a growth-oriented budget. There is a direction in this, I can see that. But growth depends on creating actual demand in the hands of the poor and middle-class people. What you see, how it is going to generate or escalate the demand part of it, which all of you are looking for. Ultimately, your profit or bottom line or balance sheet will survive on the basis of more demand. I saw your balance sheet published in this quarter loss, last quarter loss was less than the previous quarter. In fact, if I look at that. So how you look at the budget in terms of stimulating demand in the rural areas and other areas?
I think, Prabhu, one thing that we have not done over many years is the focus on infrastructure. We've been slowly disinvesting. Now we move to privatizing, which is a very solid thing. But ultimately, demand has to come from building infrastructure. You've seen it in China. The entire Chinese economy is based on excellent investment in infrastructure, which also reduces the cost of moving goods, having more electricity available. So we are for the first time seeing a huge boost in investment, and I think it's a very positive thing. And as Uday said, I think a transparent budget with the fiscal deficits being shown to be what they actually are, and allocating more for capital and less for revenue. I think this is the right way to go. Stock market reacts. Stock markets are ephemeral. It goes up one day, it goes on one day. So saying 5 lakh crores, we have not got 5 lakh crores in a bank account. It is in a piece of paper, and tomorrow it may go down.
Feel-good factor that I'm richer by so much, sir.
Yeah, there's a feel-good factor, and it will go down to everybody. Ultimately, businesses do well, economy does well. We will, as a country, do well, and people will get more.
You see, as Ubed pointed out, I'll take that point forward. Transparency, for example, he talked about the first time we are seeing transparent data. Sanjeev is a finance person. He runs a big finance successful company also. I'm going to ask him that how is it transferred when the gap between the expenditure and the income, which is projected in the budget, is huge, 12 lakh crore rupees. Did you tell me which way? Because they are saying some bad bank. I don't know whether bad bank is a bad idea or a good idea, because there's discussion about that. They are talking about disinvestment or privatization, 2 banks and 1 PSU, maybe LIC IPO is coming. Do you think this 12 lakh crore rupees without taxation anywhere Where is this hit? I can't find in the transparency factor where it is coming from. You have read the budget, more detail.
No, so the transparency, as Uday said, is in including a lot of the off-balance sheet expenditures this time into the main numbers, and the transparency is in the disclosure. The execution now will be on the basis of the spends, which will initially start from the government in various sectors of infrastructure, which should help to create jobs. That coupled with the fact that we are at the better end of the pandemic right now, as long as we can ensure quick vaccination across the country, it will help in getting consumer confidence back. That will start the consumer demand cycle, which means then as capacities get utilized, private sector starts investing again, and you end up creating a whole virtuous cycle. This cycle, see, as you know, the deficit is an issue of numerator and denominator. This cycle aims to build on the economy, expand the denominator, and get the numerator down. The only other theoretical way is by contracting the economy, get the numerator down, but that in most cases has never been shown to help in meeting the fiscal deficits. And I'll make one more point. We must keep in mind we are not like the Western world, which is a developed world, all infrastructures by and large in place. So that's a working capital economy. We are very much a capital investment economy where we need to invest in the infrastructure to build our future. So some deficit, not any deficit, but some deficit is understandable and acceptable. And as Venu mentioned also, it is not just the size of the spend, the quality of the spend is very important. So we have to see that the spend goes into capex, into infrastructure, because then it has long lasting multiplier effect on economic growth.
No, I get the point. I'm asking you where the money will come from. Transparency in terms of revenue coming forward. If there is some generic statement that we will sell this and we will sell this, how will the 12 lakh rupees which you're talking about infrastructure you have to spend? Okay, by selling the family silver, which is everything will be sold according to the budget, the spirit of the budget that we will sell and sell. Whether there is a buyer or not, we don't know, because we have been trying to sell for the past 12, almost 12 or 14 years. Disinvestment targets have never been met by any government, whether this government or the earlier government. So the track record of disinvestment is very poor. That is something. When I'm asking you, all of you, Chandrajit, you may be able to answer this question. Where will this 12 lakh rupees gap which is happening for expenditure, for infrastructure, which Venu is talking about? You have to build roads or airports or the health sector or whatever you want to do, schools or colleges. Infrastructure means labor intensive. I assume that infrastructure means labor intensive labor structure where you get the money in the hands of people and let's spend and buy Venu scooter or buy something finance from Sanjeev or go to the bank of Uday Kotak to get some money. Where will this money come from? 12 lakh crore rupees. Can you give me some idea? Because I've been finding answer for this question. I've not been able to get it myself. 12 lakh crore rupees, where will it come from?
So I think, as I mentioned at the outset, the budget has really betted very strongly on growth. And of course, you yourself spoke about disinvestment and privatization. And yes, the track record has been, but this is a very bold one. And I see, and there is a need today, and that need itself will help the implementation of it. But three critical areas of immediate intervention for deepening the recovery and catapulting, so to say, to a high growth orbit are really demand generation, both consumption and investments, improving credit availability, and employment generation. And I think the first two benefits, industries across the segments and sectors. And the third is the most effective way, if one can say, of ensuring an inclusive growth. But having said that, the budget proposal provide a big boost to all the three critical areas that I mentioned, and it's also simultaneously displays very strong fiscal management and ensuring macroeconomic stability, and it really also sets the tone for the big ticket reforms. And all of this together, if you see, really brings in that phenomenal focus on growth, and that's how I guess the government is betting on it, to see that we are able to finance that deficit that you are talking about. So I think this betting on
Sibi,
growth
you're
is
right.
a very important point.
Intent and intention of the budget and spirit of the budget, nobody can question. The sixth principle which Prime said and chased. They are very well. But the question is, as you look at the past, I'm again repeating start. In 98, Railway decided to monetize its land bank. 25 years later, we are still not able to raise in 1,000 crore rupees. The value of that land bank is over 1 million, 10 lakh crore rupees. So I'm just saying that money has to come, because when we were teacher of economics and student of economics, we were told supply creates its own demand. Supply has been creating demand till a couple of years ago. Now demand has to create the supply. But demand, I just want to know, because as a consumer, if middle class and lower middle class doesn't get the money in their hand, taxation structure buying what it is, how will you do it? And the other thing is that you're talking about big growth budget. I'm just looking at the figures again, budget figures. You know the last final figures of the 2021 expenditure estimates, actual 34.5 lakh crore. Correct me, Uday, if you read it. 34.5 lakh rupees was the actual expenditure by 31st March 2021. And estimated budget for the next year, 34 lakh, 48 lakh, 34.48. Where is the expenditure?
Yeah, I think Prabhu, you've really obviously got your facts on your fingertips. Here is what I would like to say.
Where the expenditure goes? Which was last year, what you spent at the same level you are going to do?
I'm coming to that. First, we are all we are all in our ways. We run our businesses, our companies, and in many ways, what is true for a company is true for a country.
Correct.
There has to be a strategy, and there has to be a roadmap, and there has to be execution. So what this budget has very well done has got the strategy and the roadmap in front of us. It is now, as we all know, when we run our companies, the heart of the sustainable success is execution. And we would like to support the government as the government goes down a very strong execution plan, which is needed in the years to come. And let me take you back to Margaret Thatcher, 1980. She changed the UK with the passion, purpose, and surgical execution of their privatization plan. That is what I think India has to embark upon with a certain vigor and a rigor. And I hope that is something which we see in the next 12 to 24 months. So that is point number one. Point number two on total expenditure. As Venu rightly said, and Sanjeev corroborated, what we are doing is we are shifting from revenue expenditure to capital expenditure. And that is a quality of expenditure which is very important. Therefore, you kept the budgeted expenditure under control by reducing the wasteful expenditure, which we may call as revenue expenditure in some cases, okay? And moving it to CapEx, which will give sustainable real assets on the ground for future generations. One of the worries each of us should have is that when we borrow, we are borrowing from the future generations. It is our duty to ensure that the borrowing is well used for returns which the future generations get. And that can only happen if we invest the borrowed money into right assets which generate returns over decades in the future. That is how we protect future generations, Prabhu.
Well, you're a good banker. You have raised a very fundamental question. You're borrowing for a future generation. From 98 or even 91, when the reform started, borrowing of the government has been increasing every year. To meet the capital expenditure and the revenue, whatever you're talking about, government will have to raise 3,500 crore rupees per day. And the cost of borrowing it, that you are leaving the next generation of minor years under debt for many, many more decades, because paying for the debt, you're spending almost 40% of your revenue on debt and services alone. And it is going after year. This time is 21% debt in servicing. Last 2 years ago, it was 18%. Before that, it was 15%. So debt servicing has been going because you're not repaying the debts which you're raising. 3,500 crore rupees you will borrow from somewhere. Obviously, the cost of borrowing will also bring down the growth because it will be heavy cost to be paid for development. When, what do you answer? How do you answer this question?
The answer should be coming from where we invest. In the past, budget deficits have been giving away revenue expenditure, which does not get us any return. I think for the first time, we are seeing a qualitative difference that the expenditure is focused on capex. And the more we focus on capex, and there are more areas, privatization we're talking about. What about water? What wastewater that we throw out in India can have, there's enough water for all the cities in India, but we do not recycle practically any water except in Chennai, 30%. But even 70% goes into the sea. I think if you invest in infrastructure that has got an economic payback, then you will be able to recover your money and reduce your interest or debt service expenditure. But as long as we've been spending more and more on revenue, there is no return. And that's where we are today. And I think this is a major change in the direction of the country in this budget towards long term, having solid capex and a return, which is what industry also does.
No, this is the question which I'm looking at. Again, my favorite subject is stock market comes back. Because 90% of your FDI last year came into only hot market, stock market, which is non-productive, which has nothing to do with the real growth. So if that kind of foreign investment running into billions and billions of dollars coming in, investment possibilities in the real estate, you're talking about infrastructure. So there's some kind of mismatch in our funding processes, fund coming from outside and internal resources which we generate for investing in real infrastructure, because FDI is not coming into infrastructure at all, as you go by the last year figures. In pandemic, when the entire country, entire world was going down, the stock market was going up. There is something which economics I have not read in my life. So there must be something very hot there happening. But infrastructure is a good idea. It is a very good thing that they are going to spend more money on capex and on infrastructure. But basic thing started how you will raise the demand, which all of you will almost benefit from there, because you have to inequalities of income is already known. Because the top 1%, 2% people are getting about 80% benefit. So where is the demand, which is the mass demand, which is rural demand? How will it come from this budget after budget?
Now you look at China, look at emerging markets. I think Sanjeev made the point. We are not a working capital economy. We are an economy that does require infrastructure. Infrastructure means the use of labor, capital, and a trickle down effect. And we will have economic growth. And the lower down in the economy, people will get the money to spend. So you have to have the commitment, as we do in corporates. When we spend on capex, we expect a return, and that return is plowed back into growing the company. I think the same is true of our economy.
But that happens in the private company. Yes, they plow back the profit into the company expansion and diversification. What happens? But in terms of government, this has not happened. Technology-wise, we are very important. Uday, I just want to go back to the basic nuts and bolts of the budget. They are talking about 2 private banks will be nationalized. Do you have any idea about it? You
No,
may be
I
buying
think,
one of them.
no, Prabhu, I think you've got to really look at, again, it's a very bold step. I cannot remember in the history of my career in a post-nationalized world where any government has had the courage to go out and say, we will privatize 2 public sector banks. And I genuinely believe the correct model for India at this stage of our evolution is
Which
a
are the
total of
banks? I'm interested in which are the banks you can suspect to on the hit list.
My view is that the larger banks, which is the State Bank of India and the 4 other merged banks, which are a total of 12, or
Yeah.
those banks will not be privatized. It would
Okay.
be, my sense is it will be out of the others,
Others which are on the bottom line. They are just struggling
which
to
are
survive.
relatively the smaller ones. And that is where you get best of both the worlds. You get large banks continuing in the public sector, consolidated. And out of the balance, you test out the waters with a couple of them,